All right, so welcome everybody. My name is Nick Bates. I serve as the Assistant Director for Thurman Center Networks at the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground at Boston University. And I'm also working with the a part of the TPE steering committee on the candidate sub-working group. And then I'll let Christian introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Happy morning, afternoon, evening, midday, wherever you're located from geographically. My name is Christian Rafael Suero, he, him, his. I'm currently an assistant director for staff development, engagement, and onboarding. And that just means I help the professional staff with their trainings and ongoing initiatives. And I am honored to co-serve with Nick as your co-chairs for candidate development and to be in the space today.
All right, and thank you for attending. This is our TPE webinar of sorts, sort of workshop, working space where we're going to talk about this idea of professional branding and your professional brand identity. And we really thought this was a nuanced topic, specifically at least nuanced changes to this topic specifically that have happened within the last years with our current global circumstance and situation. This may have looked differently, over a year ago of how we've sort of approached this different sort of idea. I think many of you can agree. And so today we're going to walk through some sort of ideas. We're going to talk about the idea of vocation. We're going to talk about the idea of purpose in the profession. And then we're going to talk about what your identity can look like as you navigate your purpose in your vocation. And then we'll show you an example. Christian's actually going to show his own personal e-portfolio, which includes his, website designs and things of that nature. And then I'll have an opportunity as well to show my LinkedIn page profile in particular, which I use to do a lot of my professional branding and identity work within the field of higher education. So just give you all a little bit of an outline of how we'll do those things. And feel free. We have a small group with us here in person, but for those who are watching later, if you have any questions for us, feel free to send us an email. You can see our email listed on the TPE website. All right. And so to get started, I want to talk about this idea of vocation. And many people have heard that idea of vocation and have often equated it to the industry or the profession that they work in, right? Some regions and some cities or towns have vocational schools where people attend to learn specific trades. And so that's commonly like how a lot of people understand that word vocation. And so there's an author that we use within our center here at Boston University by the name of Parker Palmer, who is a Howard Thurman scholar. And he talks about the idea of vocation being rooted in the Latin word for voice. And so Parker Palmer, he looks at vocation as where does your voice need to be heard? And so it's very important when we think about this idea of vocation, we really have to disconnect it a bit from our identity, because a lot of what we do is we are working a specific role that we also need to provide for a specific lifestyle that we want to provide, whether it's for ourselves or our families, but that is also a part of our role. Now, within our role may be some things that apply or provide platforms to advocate for our passions. And so I want to start here in this place to distinguish that, because I think what happens over time as we get so deeply engaged in our digital identities, we start to take all of these identities on as if they're one identity, as if they're not different and used for different purposes. And so sometimes for us, that can be particularly challenging as we navigate things in our career. And so if we sort of reorient our idea of vocation to be thinking about where does our voice need to be heard, right? Instead of just the trade or the industry that you are a part of. And so that's where I wanted to start initially, to sort of to ground our conversation as we navigate this idea of professional identity. As we continue, and we plan to actually make this a bit of a worksheet so we can email out to everybody. But as we continue, our professional identities then become, what is our purpose, right? For many of us, our purpose is, what is it, what are the audiences that we want to reach within our profession and or work with and or support? That's sort of how we look at our purpose. But we also have to define, what type of professional do I want to be as I carry out my purpose? And so that's a part of the core piece that we have to decide. And once we've decided, right, what causes are important to us, how we want to carry out these different things, we've then decided how we can facilitate our exchanges within these spaces, which is really important. And you'll begin to understand that, right? Christian, any thoughts to that before we continue?
No, co-sign and agree, and I appreciated what you were mentioning about sometimes when we have platforms like may that be like LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, you name them, like how we sometimes may take on all those identities and assume it as one and the importance of just vocation in general. So no, nothing to add. Thank you for sharing that.
So the next phase we want to move in is use, right? So there are various different social medias, various different platforms that you use. You can be a fan of. I remember when I was coming up in the field, there was the social media burst into Twitter, and things like essay chat and essay grad chat were starting to become a really big part of the field. The student affairs Facebook groups started to really emerge a lot. So you had to decide, who do you want to be in those spaces as we navigate already having these accounts for our own personal usage. And so we have to really navigate and negotiate that as grads. And we have different messages that we will receive about professionalism. And again, you have to decide what type of professional you want to be as you navigate what professionalism is. But we had these different platforms, and we were learning on the fly as grads how to exist in these spaces prior to NASPA working on things like the technology competency. And so we were trying to understand, is this social media account for my personal use, or is this social media account to further and build my student affairs brand? And so these are things that we had to work on over time. And so I made a choice intentionally to keep my own personal account and evolve it into the account that I wanted for my student affairs brand. And I chose to do that because for me, it was important to show my students examples of growth over time, right? Others may have decided, hey, I want to keep my own personal life to the side, and I would like to separate that from my profession, and I want to create a professional account. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I don't think there's a best practice or a best choice. I think this is solely about the boundaries that you want to create for yourself, which is why I wanted to root us in that idea of vocation, to progress to purpose and progress to which type of use that you want to decide. That's the only way I think you can make a decision on how do you engage these spaces and what's important to you. I think that's the only way that you can build upon. If you want a website, if you just want to have a little bit of presence to make sure you're aware of the trends, the only ways you can do that is really evaluate your own personal purpose and why you decided to begin this journey in your career and engage in these spaces within your career. Yeah. All right. Christian's nodding his head for me.
Sorry, yeah. I think because for me, I think so my social media, like I have 2 accounts. I actually have 3 accounts. One for like my personal, like with my friends and family. Then I have one that's like what you were mentioning, the professional. Then I have a nerdy one, which is like my streaming and my gaming. But I think to what you were saying, like there's no perfect way to like identify how you engage in like student affairs and identifying your vocation. For me, I think I don't like, I think the light that I present myself in both those spheres look so different. So why I had to gravitate to two, but I really appreciate how you talked about there's no perfect way, because I think when we think of how do we present ourselves in spaces, we think that there must be a perfect way, and there really isn't.
Yeah, the best advice I can give anybody, any professional, is that only you can decide what professional that you want to be in any industry. People can offer you advice, suggestions, all of these different things. You can study and you can look at best practices, but you still have to articulate what works for you and what works for you in whatever specific setting. And that gets us to our next point, right? There are so many different digital and virtual spaces for you to be in. And there are also, when COVID protocols will allow, different physical spaces that you want to be in, and you have to decide which ones work for you or which ones can be a learning opportunity for you. Myself personally, I don't have a Facebook page, so I don't use the student affairs Facebook group. I'm not in that space. That space just doesn't work for me because I don't want to be a part of the Facebook community. I don't like the platform. Just because the user interface, it's really much easier for me to use Twitter and or Instagram. That's just a personal choice. That doesn't mean that that platform may not be beneficial to someone else, but it's just my decision to not use that platform, right? I have memberships with NASPA, but I don't have memberships with ACPA. It's not that ACPA is a bad resource. That's completely untrue. It's just not my resource of preference. And so you really have to decide what spaces work for you, which spaces do you feel like you need to be in, which spaces do you need to engage, you need to learn from. That's a decision that you have to make as you craft your professional development plan. And this is it's a plug that we will have NASPA TPE sponsor sessions within the NASPA um, annual conference. And so one of the two of our sessions will actually talk about these ideas of professional development plans. But you have to decide what works with your professional development plan and which spaces work for you. It doesn't mean a space is bad or it isn't good or it isn't useful. It's really all about decisions and what can you get from them. For me, I like to use the platform Twitter because I like to see people convey their stories over time and unpack them over time to feel this sort of shared commonality that we all have. I think that's why SA Chat has sort of a real boom back in the industry a few years ago, is because we got to see personal stories from everyone in a digital space in real time. And so it's beneficial. Other folks, you may decide like, hey, I'm not a social media person that I want to engage in these digital spaces. I really am just a person that wants to do well with the amount of time that I have to when I'm at work. And I only want to go there physically, right? I don't want to be a part of the digital spaces. That's a personal decision. It's not a bad decision either way. It's just a decision that you decided to make. Okay. Other thoughts, Christian, before we move on and continue?
For those who may not know what the SA chat is, do you want to share what that is?
Absolutely. So I would say when I was in grad school in 2013, 2014, finishing up in 2015, SA Chat was a community that was started on Twitter. I believe it was closely related to the Inside Higher Ed blog website, where they would have sort of noon chats on Twitter using the hashtag SA Chat. And every sort of day, I believe it was a Tuesday or Thursday every week, they were featuring different topics for professionals across the world to plug in and use the hashtag SA Chat and to have conversations related to the topic, from things that they're experiencing at their own institutions, things that they're reading and sort of tracking as best practices, or just idea as emerging news came up in student affairs. And so this platform was also a great opportunity for folks to show the different strategies and the different programs and systems that they're building in their institution and community with other professionals. And so for really seemed to be very much an important dialogue space, but also it seemed to be initially a very important space to advocate for the work that you're doing and be able to showcase it among other professionals. And so it sort of became a way of getting a peek into what other people are doing. And I think it also loosely helped people as they navigate continuing and advancing in their careers. And so it was sort of a very useful space. I think they still continue that space today, but it's just a different audience, and people have decided to move on, and new people have decided to move into it. So we've done enough talking at you. I want to show Christian's portfolio, and then we can show my LinkedIn page after, and then we can sort of take this time and have some dialogue, since we have such a small group, about ideas or things that you are pondering as you navigate your sort of space in your career.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to share my screen. And I think when Nick and I were thinking of this session, we TP is right around the corner, right? And even if individuals aren't going TPE, but I will say everyone should go to TPE virtual. The job search process is still 365, right? And so I think when I think of e-portfolios, there's like two things that like stick to me that speak to like who I am. So like when I meet with employers, I'm able to showcase to them like, oh, by the way, this is something I want to give to you to learn more about who I am as a person, because people may not be able to showcase all of who they are in 15 or 30 minutes, or even on an on-campus or virtual campus experience. And so there might be employers who take the time to understand someone more by going through their website or through their e-portfolio, whatever the HR guidelines determine. And so for me, I took the time to create a website for myself in terms of that outlines, like who am I, and to like share in the space. I'm a doctoral candidate. I also work a full-time job. So there were different things I wanted to make sure I highlight in my experience. And so of course, someone can see here what my current roles are, my publications, and a little bit about who I am, but then can also go, oh, that's my resume, can also go into like, what are my research areas, the grants I've received on those research projects, and then current awards. But I'll be frank, for me, when I'm in interview spaces, I don't necessarily share my website. What I do is share them a Google Drive. And so normally when I'm in person, I will like, oh, here's a portfolio of everything I've done. Here are some sample flyers, some sample programs, some statistics. Here's my resume, cover letter, my references as well. Like, here's the whole packet. But we're in a virtual space. We can't deliver those things. I mean, I'm sure someone can, but I don't have time to mail a portfolio to people for interviews. And so what I've done is created an online version of that. And so with my most recent employment hire, this is what I gave to them, and something that they shared. They were very thankful that I took the time to make for them, because they needed extra understanding of who I was. And so what you'll see is like, I created a simple Google Drive, and in there I had some examples of some of the products I did. So here's my resume tab. So, and there's my resume, my references, my dissertation aligned with the company. So my dissertation abstract. But where the liquid gold was professional development, because that was the job I was applying for. And under here, they could have done a deeper dive of seeing, okay, wow, there's some samples in here that we can look at on our own spare time as a committee. Everything from mentorship programs to my onboarding manual for my department. And it's just one click away. And so for me, if you're ever interested or interviewing, you have that space and opportunity to share with them an e-portfolio, that might also put you, advance you against the edge of other people if they do review your files. So those are two portfolios that I'll share with you in that space.
I'm going to share my LinkedIn page so we can see that. And I use my LinkedIn page in a similar format that Christian does, to really house sort of anything that I'm a part of, or whether it's sort of news stories and or programs that are publicly available, even some of the things that we've done with the placement exchange. I use my LinkedIn in a very similar way to make sure that for those who are looking for more resources within our field, more resources about the work related to what I do in my profession, and also just to see if anyone if you are recruiting or looking for something, you can find information about me in one succinct place. And so I share my screen and share my LinkedIn page. And if everybody can see, classic headshot, all of those good things. And my hair is a little bit longer than it was in that picture. But one of the things that I want to point out is that people have different approaches, how they use the bio section. Some people list their positions. Some people list something that they feel like is the core of what they do for work. That's what I chose to do in this example, right? And so helping people tell stories, create content, and growing their understanding of identity is really true into what I do within my work in the Howard Thurman Center. It's all about narrative. But what I really wanted to highlight is that there's this beautiful section right here called featured, that you can add videos and sort of website things that you're featured in on your LinkedIn page, which is commonly a website used for professional networking across industries. So I like to put anything that I've hosted or any programs where I've worked on, of any portfolio type of things that Christian just mentioned, where it's sample PDFs. I like to put all of those things in a link in the feature page. And so here you can see for our center, I hosted a panel with the cast from the TV show A Million Little Things. But I've also done hostings for our athletic department on campus to talk about the idea of what does being a Black coach mean. I've also worked with our student activities or department to host a Q&A with the director of the film Just Mercy. But again, I've also been featured on the TPE, the Placement Exchange webinar. And so these are opportunities to share resources, but also highlight yourself at the same time. And so I think that can be completely useful for advancing your career. And it doesn't have to be programs that you're a part of. Again, it could be a link to your website or your e-portfolio. It could be the link to that Google Drive that Christian mentioned. All of those things can be sort of used in this particular link right here. And then, of course, you all know the basic activity about LinkedIn. I think it's really helpful if you try to read and share posts, comment on things that people are discussing in your industry. This gives you a chance to offer a quick thought and maybe potentially spur a new connections on your field. And so I think that's a great example of a post I commented on by someone named Amma, who I actually met working for NASPA's technology knowledge community. We met through social media, through essay chat, and then we became an instant lifelong connection. And so it's just again deciding where you want to be in these spaces and who you want to be and how you wanted to use them. I've always wanted to use them to create connections and get to know more about people's personal stories in the field, and they've led to me helping me gain more success in different places. But that's how I've chosen to use it. You could be, again, someone who only decides to attend conferences and send people emails. I've seen all of these things be successful methods to advance your career, but I really wanted to highlight the featured page and how you can use it as sort of a portfolio. So if you're not someone like me, who I'm not as tech savvy as Christian, I'm not going to create such a beautiful and eloquent website. LinkedIn is already there, it already works, and it was very useful to me for that purpose. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts? Christian, yes, I love LinkedIn. Yeah, absolutely. And LinkedIn is for me today, my personal choice of a place to exchange related to my industry. I still use my Twitter page, but I'm not avid in those spaces anymore professionally. I've just decided to leave it all on LinkedIn. I still use Instagram, but I'm just not avid in that professional space anymore. I've decided that I've wanted everything to flow through LinkedIn and use it as such. And so that's just a choice that I've made that I think you can make over time about what works for you as you grow in your career. But before, again, when I was earlier in my career trying to decide what professional I wanted to be, what circles were important for me to be in, what memberships were important for me to have, I tried everything. So I had the ACPA membership and attended that conference. I had the Twitter, Facebook, all of those things, and I was, avid in checking in all of those places. But I decided over time I wanted to reduce my digital presence in every space and concentrate on just one space. So it's really about personal choice, and that's what I really want to advocate for. And it's just why we started with that idea of vocation, being where does your voice need to be heard, not just the profession that you're in. Other questions? Ariel, Kayla, any questions, any thoughts that you all are pondering on? Yeah, so Kayla sharing about the group, Christian's idea of making a Google Drive. Yeah, it's a completely great idea. And it's a really phenomenal one because I'm pretty sure we all have a resume and reference folder anyway as we do our search. So why not just put it in one space and edit it for a way it can be publicly available for those who are considering your candidacy.
And it's so easy just because, so depending on like where you're at with your job search, you may be applying for everything, but everything has specifics to it, right? So like every job is looking for something specific in its job description. So creating a portfolio for each job description is great because then you remember what you have to talk about. I mean, you should always practice and remember what you're going to do in that interview space, but it's another check-in point for yourself to say, okay, did I talk about that onboarding manual because that job description talked about onboarding and et cetera.
Yeah, I actually want to echo that sentiment. It is a great reminder to yourself what you've accomplished and or achieved. And I'd also add, and I didn't even think about this until you showed it, it's a great way to sort of take control of the narrative that is out there about your candidacy. And so if I'm an employer and I you send me this link and I'm able to see all of the materials and things that you've done, I can really get a great sense of how you can contribute to our organization or our department. And I'm also able to ask you some really direct questions about what I've seen. So I think if someone is asking you a direct question about something that you've made available, that's made sort of an interview question a little bit easier for you, or a little bit more intentional for you. And so I didn't really think about that until you showed that portfolio.
I have a question about the virtual portfolio. So when you have your physical portfolio, like, you can't really show it to them until you go to the interview. But with the virtual portfolio, do you wait until the interview, or do you like throw like a link to it, like a hyperlink to it somewhere in your cover letter or on your resume?
Great question. So, full transparency, I recently started doing e-portfolios, and with the full transparency, I am job searching, and I got a new job. And so, what I did, and that's with that employer, was sent it. So it was interesting because one employer did video calls. And so I asked before the interview, would it be okay if I send them my e-portfolio that I will reference in the interview? And they said, yeah, throw in the chat. So for one of my employers, I just threw it in the chat. But then what I did also was after the interview, I emailed them my thank you with the portfolio. Because if you didn't get it in the chat, you will get it now. And so that's how I did it. You can always confirm if it's okay because some places may say like, we don't enable the chat feature for X, Y, and Z reason. So confirm if there is going to be a chat feature, and if you can send your e-portfolio there, send it in the interview. And then when you're sending your thank you, send it in the thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good idea. You can create like a tiny URL for your virtual portfolio too, instead of that long Google Drive share link.
And that's also where you get creative too. That's a great point. I'm happy you mentioned that. For me personally, I still have my Instagram, and I know I still have some of my audience there. I just use the link tree like everybody else. I link tree to some of the things that I'll show in that feature section in LinkedIn. I put all of those things in Linktree as well. And so for folks who are still tapped into me in that space, right? Because you know how you still have followers who are still with you in that space, they can still see the work that I'm working on by clicking the link tree in my bio. And so again, that's just the uses of our technology, of how we can be a little bit more intentional about where we put it. Christian, you want to talk about how you went about sort of adding what you added into the Google Drive?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, and I can share my screen again, 1 second. So I think for me, what I did was, and I think this goes back to what Nick was saying about vocation, like what speaks to you, as well as what do you want people to understand, or what do you want people to see? Well, of course, you're going to see my resume references, because they're going to get that regardless, right? And I think I shared this before, but I am a doctoral student or a candidate. And so part of my doctoral journey is part of what I want to show people, especially when I'm applying for specific jobs where it's like PG or PhD preferred. Well, I don't have a PhD. I'm in this limbo state, but you know what? Let me show you my abstract of what I'm doing. And so what you would do is you just create your folders and then upload everything into that folder that's relevant to that. What I did though was, like, for professional development, instead of having all these folders in the first folder, I just did a folder for professional development and then created subfolders. So one thing that this job was looking for was someone that can help with cohort experiences for coaching. And here, I was like, here's my cohort assessment. Here's my cohort schedule for one of my programs, and then an executive summary if you want to learn more. I did not make this from scratch. I had this already from my current job. So I was able to upload that as samples. And same thing goes with, I was doing a webinar series with NASPA on professional development. Here was our proposal on a Word doc. So look at that job description and identify, aside from, your resume, your references, etc., that they would normally get from the application itself, what are those products that you can share with them that could really elevate and speak to the work that you've done, or that you are proud of showing, right? Like, if you know you're going to talk about a manual in an interview that you've created for student staff, put that manual in there, especially if it relates back to that role you're applying to. And so, yeah, that's how I did it.
No, thank you for sharing because that's very poignant, right? You sort of loosely crafted it around your current role and also adding ideas about what you were looking for in a newer role, and so you're able to really tailor that link to work in a very specific ways for those who are looking at and evaluating your candidacy. And so I think that's a great example, right? You decided what spaces that you want to be in, what's your purpose and what's your intention, and how to facilitate that. And so it's an easy way of crafting your identity. And also too, you're ready. You're ready at any moment with such a creation like that. And so that's also sort of the big part about obtaining your role is making sure you're ready for the opportunity as well.
I have another question. So some of the things in your portfolio, did you maybe ask like your employer at the time if you could include it? Because I imagine maybe some documents might be more private or not. Like, how did you make those decisions?
Great question. So I didn't include anything that was like policy or non-shareable.
Yeah, I didn't mean like, top secret, but sometimes like you can create your own like training manual, but maybe they don't want it being shared outside your department.
Yeah, and so I never would stray someone in a wrong path. So I'll tell you what I did. My current employer knows I was job searching. So I shared with them, like with the products that I created that I'm going to showcase my work. And that wouldn't be any different if I was going somewhere in person. I would give them my portfolio, like here you are. And so with this, a lot of the things I worked on were things that like either I created by myself or with a coworker, and just made sure that my employer knew. I was like, hey, I'm going to share this as part of my portfolio. And I have a good working relationship with my supervisor. So she said, absolutely go for it. Is there anything that I need to send you? I was like, no, you're good. And so I think if there's anything that you have created, I think you can feel empowered to add. But if there's something that you're like, oh, I don't know if I should add this, trust your gut and ask for clarity or permission. Then if there's something that you're like, oh, I can't add this document in there. But here's a good example. So let's talk about like flyers, right? Like you probably created a flyer for a department or institution before on Canva or et cetera, right? For me, Christian Raphael speaking for himself, I would use that as a product showcase, like, oh, this is my artistic skills of how I created flyers for my institution. That will be a lot easier to showcase, right? If I'm creating, let's say, a policy handbook on partners and pet policies in my department, I may not show that, but I might show the things that led up to that point of like how I thought about that policy and et cetera. I don't know. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button.
No worries, yeah. And I know it's a very tricky space, right? Of like, what can I share and what can't I share? And I think if you feel comfortable in sharing your products and acknowledging like, hey, this is some of the works I did in my last institution. But then if there's something that like, you're like, my gut says not to share this, trust your gut and ask for permission.
Yeah. Because it's so different when I would share my physical portfolio at an interview, I took that home with me. But now that it's virtual, like, they could download it, they can do whatever they want with it, whether or not you work for them. So that's always a little curious.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great point, right? It's another the level of security, no pun intended, is now removed, right? Because the security was you gave them a physical one that you're walking away with, right? But like saying like here's a link, and unless you like close the link, they'll always have access to it. So make sure what you're sharing, you're okay with that possible employer or not employer to have access to that information.
And you can also be intentional about looking for things that that may already be public facing. And so say if you're thinking about programming and marketing is a big part of the position you're searching for, we can imagine that your advertising was probably public, right? It was available and open for everyone. And so that's a case where you're a little bit more safer than having to sort of distinguish whether or not you can release a training manual, for example. And so this is something to consider.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts as we sort of close to the end? We wanted to leave time for questions, but
I have a question, and then for those who are in the space, with like platforms like LinkedIn, right? I see LinkedIn as, I hate saying this, but like the professional version of Facebook, right? Where it is focused on careers, it's focused on articles about professional development, mentorship, jobs, and etc. I was just curious on, because Nick, thank you for sharing your LinkedIn, and I'm curious to see like how many people in this space are active on LinkedIn or not active, out of curiosity.
Oh, you can go ahead.
Hi guys, nice to see you. I am actually really new to LinkedIn. I wanted to jump in really quick because I was a music education student in undergrad, and that really wasn't a thing because it was just so focused on networking in public events and events in the community. But so still new to LinkedIn. I haven't made any posts or anything. I really need to get on that. I was wondering actually, do you guys have any advice on what to post, how to get started?
So for me, and it was so funny, it's probably 2 or 3 years ago, my LinkedIn was not a thing like this. I just saw the opportunity and how much it was using, people were using it. So for me personally, and it's, we pre-recorded for our NASPA session, and so it's on my mind right now about what I just said. But I am someone who considers myself an educator first. So I've also taught in the classroom and taught classes in sociology as well. And I also do sort of candidate coaching on the side outside of TPE. And I also do sort of consulting work as well. And so for me, it was important to make sure that I painted a broad scope of myself as an educator. And so I use LinkedIn to discuss things related to education in general, not just higher education, but primary and secondary education. Things that are related to labor equity are very important to me to discuss in that space. And so things talking about wages, what compensation looks like, compensation packages, outlining these things. And then things that are what I believe related to narrative. And so when you think about your identity, when you think about how your identity clashes with all of these different systems, these are the things that I decided to share and repost in that space within on LinkedIn. Because I know primarily within my current role, I'm largely responsible for the narrative of our center at Boston University and Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground. And so since my role is largely how do I create the narrative, that means I work a lot with creating our content and working with the content of every single program. So I wanted to be able to showcase my abilities to craft, to create, and connect narratives. And so that's where I use that space to sort of analyze postings and articles, sharing things from the field. But it's also a place where you can share your successes. As well. And so I use that space to talk about that as well, and some things that, hey, this happened and I'm actually particularly proud of myself for this. And I want other people to know that we're doing this good work here. So those are the ways I would suggest you doing that. I would suggest you find some associations that you want to belong to. You in particular, I think your degree in music education, just because you're in higher education, what you learn there it doesn't go away. It's actually completely really, really useful when we think about workshops, trainings, and different things of that nature, and programming. It's just really useful. So if you still have some networks that you may have belonged into and they actually have a LinkedIn presence, or people who have a presence from those networks on LinkedIn, I would encourage you to use those spaces in that way as well. But you can follow NASPA, you can follow us at the Placement Exchange for more information, just to keep up and keep up with the field, but also make sure you're engaged in that space.
Yeah, ×2, ×3 to the 10th power, everything Nick said about LinkedIn. Because I don't know, I think now the word vocation's really stuck in my head, Nick. And so I feel like I'm gonna keep saying the word vocation, but it really is about, at least how I have interpreted my LinkedIn, it is to acknowledge 3 things. One, like my experiences in the workplace. I never like call out an employer and say, oh my gosh, this employer is horrible. Like, it's just acknowledging like where I'm at in my work experience in my life, to highlight the successes, as Nick said. But then 3, Nick talked about like the feature section, and I think that's very powerful. I think whether it be individuals working on their own projects or, wanting to share some of the work they've done. Like for me, I do podcasting. So this is why I wanted to share, because like when you said music, like I thought of audio files and it came straight to this, but like I have a podcast with a colleague. And so like here, the featured section, here's the link, someone clicks on it, and there you go. It takes us right to our website, and the first thing you see is our audio file. And so I think, depending on however you use your LinkedIn, can really leverage and complement what you want people to understand.
Thank you, guys.
Other questions, other thoughts?
Yeah, I always have a lot of questions. Sorry. So how can you use LinkedIn to like show that you are interested in a wide range of positions while also highlighting that you have preferences? Because, as I go to graduate, I have certain areas that like really pique my interest, but at the end of the day, I'm open to way more areas of higher ed. And like even I'm really interested in non-traditional roles that are off campus as well. And I feel like it's a lot harder to get yourself into those.
Nick, can I? Yes. Okay. The reason why I'm really excited, because the 2 jobs I applied for, the one that I'm confirmed, and then the other one that's still pending, I applied through LinkedIn. And so I'm going to share my screen real quick. And so here you're on my LinkedIn page. And what I like about LinkedIn is you can go to, there's a section here that talks about like open to work, and you can click that, and that helps you identify your filter. So like when you think of, let's say, just general job search platforms, you can filter. What I like about LinkedIn is that it like automatically saves no matter what. And it saves for other platforms too, but for this context, LinkedIn will always save your filter. So your specific titles that you're looking for. So me, I was like career coaching, onboarding specialist, diversity manager, and then like the areas I would be interested in. So Michigan, New York, Chicago, really random places, I know. And then like what the type of work I'll be interested in full time. So like once you have your open to work filter set up, what happens is when you click on jobs, it will take you to like the job posting site. But what happens is it already automatically filters to what you have identified. So what you would have to do if, let's say, you don't want those identifiers, is just say like professional development. And then all the employers on LinkedIn who have like shared that, that tag would be there. It's very similar to like TPE, higher ed jobs, very similar. And so for LinkedIn, if you're looking for something a little bit more specific, but also outside of higher education, just what I would do is go back, back to me, go back to your profile and just tag what you're specifically looking for. And there are higher education jobs posted on here, similarly to the TPE landing page and higher ed jobs if you are looking for a number of things. But make sure you put on those filters, and hopefully those filters will help narrow things down. And I know we don't have enough time, but the other thing I would say is informational interviews are a blessing. And so if you know you want to work in a certain area or a specific institution, you can use e-portfolios like LinkedIn that can help connect you to people who work in specific institutions or companies, and just ask for a coffee chat with them to learn more about them and that company or employer. And there you have one connection. And as we know, sometimes connections are what helps create opportunities. And so why I stand LinkedIn.
That's what actually what I wanted to add on to that is that, you can, to complement what Christian just showed you with the categorization on the open to work session, you can also just message people and use it as a networking function. And if you have your profile already prepared in the ways that we've shown you, such as using a feature tab, you can message people and say, hey, like, I'm interested in learning more about the work that you do. Here's the work that I do. I would love to set up some time to have a 30-minute or a 15 to 30-minute chat with you. And so I've used that to really speak to a lot of different consultants to understand how they work on narrative as they craft their brands and as they do the work that they do. So it's been particularly helpful for me, as if you watch our NASLA session, you'll see where I talk about having a role that doesn't sound like it's traditionally within the student affairs landscape. And so I've been having to reach out to people in different parts of student affairs or different industries to get a better way, to learn better ways to advance in my own personal role as I'm in this weird place in student affairs. And so there are a multitude of different ways you can do that, but you can also connect with people and it'll help you as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions as we close? All right, well, thank you all for joining us. Christian, any announcements that you want to make? Dr. Fox, any announcements that you would like to make as well?
My only two announcements is, one, I hope that if you are registered through TPE Virtual, that you are taking the time to look at some of the great opportunities that are coming up in terms of workshops. So like next week, Nick and I will be here in the same space, different link, of course, talking about feeling empowered in a virtual experience. And so we're going to talk about everything from how do you feel comfortable in this virtual interview space to your resume and your cover letter. And then also tomorrow is the extended deadline for the TPE Academy. So if you would like one-on-one coach, if you'd like to be paired with a coach, and a coach being someone who's been in the field of higher education for more than 3 years in the field, they give you one-on-one support and through our curriculum that we create. So that's my first announcement. And the second one is like, stay amazing, stay true. What is meant for you won't pass you. And I hope that you find whatever you're looking for.
Again, decide what type of professional you want to be. Think about vocation as, where does my voice need to be heard, not my specific industry. And again, only you can make all of these decisions and you will know what works best for you. You just have to decide. But thank you all for coming in and joining us for the session. See you all.